Welcome to the Taking the Leap podcast, where you can learn how to launch your full-time career in this part-time gig economy. No matter what career you're in, you have the potential to be the best version of you and overcome whatever obstacles stand in your way. And now, here's your host, the CEO of Bonvera, Bob Dickey.
Welcome back to Taking the Leap podcast. I'm your host, Bob Dickey, and I'm really excited to be able to introduce our next guest, someone who I have been looking forward to having on this program for quite some time. Reggie Leonard is from the University of Virginia, the School of Data Science and School of Engineering. He is an Associate Director for Career Connections and Community Engagement. He's got an incredible background. I met Reggie a number of years ago. Reggie, while you were at the University, or Liberty University, and you brought me in as a speaker for some career, and we were doing some career work on a book that I had just written. And I actually had the opportunity to travel with you to South by Southwest down in Austin, Texas, and that might be one of my favorite trips. A group of us guys went down there, and it took it all in. At night,
you introduced me to Ruth's Chris there. I had never had a Ruth's Chris steak until you introduced me to it.
That's right. I forgot about that. We celebrated a birthday party at Ruth's Chris, and we had just an absolute blast. And one of the things that I really enjoyed as we were walking around. South by Southwest is just an incredible place. So many intellectuals and thought leaders and people coming together to share ideas. And you were able to navigate from venue to venue, person to person, and were just so well spoken and thoughtful about every single topic that was being discussed. It didn't matter where we went, didn't matter what topic we were talking about. You found yourself in the middle of the conversation with insightful commentary. I'm like, oh my gosh, and I just remember taking just tons of notes. And in the evenings, I enjoyed sitting, back at the hotel. We'd kind of meet in the lobby. We'd just hang out. We were talking, and I learned so much from you through the course of that weekend, and just absolutely love spending time with you. So anytime that we get together and we start talking, I just find your insights very, no pun intended, but I guess insightful. So really looking forward for our listeners to be able to get to learn from you today, to hear what you have to share about the changing economy, especially since you are in higher education. You've worked with multiple universities now. You're helping undergrads kind of navigate the beginnings of their career. How is education changing and all those types of things? But I'll give a little bit of background for our listeners.
Sure.
So you got your undergraduate degree from Bowie State University, a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, and while you were there, you graduated cum laude, and you were also, the treasurer and founding member of the men's soccer club. So congratulations on that. I did not realize that you were a soccer player, but it does not shock me. Does not shock me. You also went to Liberty University, and you got your Master of Arts in Professional Counseling there, and that's where actually I met you. And since then, you not only did great work at Liberty University for those students, but you transitioned over to the University of Virginia, a phenomenal school, and you are, as I mentioned at the top of the program, the Associate Director for Career Connections and Community Engagement for the School of Data Science and also the School of Engineering. And I'd like to probably just go ahead and get started right there, because I know we've had multiple conversations on what you're learning. You find yourself at the very epicenter of a very growing and dynamic point in the new modern economy, and I would just like to glean some knowledge from you in terms of what are you learning, what's happening, what do you see happening in higher education right now?
Yeah. So maybe I'll start with alluding to your initial book, your first book, actually. And one of the reasons why I made a pivot, pun intended, from Liberty University to the University of Virginia was because I really wanted to be in a career services department or office where a lot of folks were really looking to push the boundaries of what we were doing for career services. Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of times students and parents have expectations of universities that the universities don't necessarily share. And so for universities, we're kind of known as being pure academics and protecting the kind of quality and sanctity of liberal arts and things like that, which I am all for. But also there's this transactional nature that a lot of people approach universities with, where there are literal ROI or return on investment calculators for how quickly you can pay your loans back after you graduate and things like that. And that's just a reality of the world and the economy that we live in. And so I wanted to be in a career services office that was doing things that kind of lived in that same world and reality as well. And so what I mean by that is we're doing a lot of skill development, a lot of career development, and not just placement and things like that, but more so helping students explore, and we even use the language of prototype their careers, so that they can essentially start to interrogate the interests that they have as soon as they have them, with little small experiences like informational interviews or externships or small projects or whatever the case may be. And so all of that kind of brings me to also why my title is so long and weird, where I'm the Associate Director for Career Connections and Community Engagement. Really, I could have been called an Associate Director for Employer Relations, but again, to your question about kind of where education is now and where it's headed and things like that, it's headed to this model where folks are going to continue to need credentialing throughout their careers, whether that's coming back to universities to do a boot camp or a workshop model or something like that, or they're doing shorter master's programs. I've heard of the idea of micro master's programs from Stanford University and other places like that. But really the goal is to help start students on the path of thinking about how to identify the things that they're interested in, and then how to pursue those interests in very proactive ways. And so career connections and community engagement means that I'm not only working with employers, but I might be working with folks in the community who are business owners or professionals who can teach skill development workshops for our students, or who can teach things like, how do you work remotely in a pandemic? You know, like, what are you learning since your company went remote fully that I can now learn as a student who's going to be going into a virtual internship, you know? And so that's kind of the nature of my role. And I think that that's the future of education, where we're also kind of having these auxiliary services that wrap around the actual academic programs that students attend and go through, and kind of prepare them for life after college, so that they can kind of close that skills gap that a lot of people write and talk about.
What's interesting that you highlight early on about the ROI and how that is an important equation for that people are considering when they're choosing higher education, what degree programs, what universities. And the question I have for you: do you believe that everybody graduating high school today needs to go to a 4-year college and get a college education, when many times for a person to do that, it's requiring a great deal of student loan debt? Because, I mean, the prices of higher education and a 4-year degree have, I mean, far outpaced almost any other item in society in terms of, you know, the skyrocketing cost. Does everybody need to do it? And I know I'm asking.
Absolutely not.
Okay, I was going to say, I know I'm asking a college kind of like administrator. Your job is to kind of fill the seats and fill the roles, and so I was like, I know that there's a little bit of a bias here, but it's interesting that you. So here you're saying no. Tell me who should and who shouldn't.
Absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's definitely a nuanced question and would really come down to the individual. But I think that one of the ways that I've always counseled folks is on their values, and kind of also thinking a little bit longer term past first destinations and what your first job would be out of college, and more so kind of considering the fact that, like, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And so applying a similar principle to your work, making sure that the decisions that you're making about what types of careers you're pursuing are in line with the vision for your life that you have. So I think the earlier you start asking questions about, like, who do you want to be? How do you want to be in the world? You know, like, how do you want to relate to your community or your family, and things like that? And then start to identify different types of career interests and things like that. I mean, to your point, to the way that you worded your question, and to the books that you've written, there are many ways to gain skills and things like that can make you employable. And there are many paths to getting to a certain type of career. I mean, even at our university, we don't even advise students based on their majors. We advise them based on industry interests, because you can get into those industries in such a variety of ways. And if you talk to most people who are in their jobs, most people's paths are pretty windy. They're not linear. And that's just the nature of the world. And so with that also being the case, I think that university is for some people, and it's also not for some people. And there are plenty of other avenues for folks to enter the workforce and, make an impact in society as well. And it's expensive. University is an expensive decision for sure. And with more and more large companies, usually tech companies, kind of removing the requirement to have a degree to apply for their positions, I think that there are going to continue to increasingly be different pathways for universities. But also, I think that, I guess maybe this is kind of getting to who should and who shouldn't go to a university. For folks who don't come from backgrounds with strong social capital, who don't come, with lots of connections and things like that, who don't come from families that have like a strong history of professional work, so to speak. I think that college is a great on-ramp into society, and into social capital and into access to opportunity that they may not otherwise know how to access. So I think that to not go the college route is to need to have a sense of resilience and ingenuity in crafting your career path that a lot of folks just don't know how to have, because our system up to this point, education-wise, has not really trained people to think in that way. It's trained people to check boxes and kind of go to the next step, and college is the final next step before a job. And so I think that for folks who have a little bit more of that ingenuity and things like that, they might be able to fare better taking a less traditional path. And that's not to say that either is better or worse, or less creative or more creative, but the college path is the most linear path for most folks.
Well, that is a brilliant insight, and especially when you start talking about folks who might start taking a less traditional path, and it feels like we're somewhat coming full circle. And what I mean by that, I was talking to a headhunting agency a number of years ago. This is when I was writing my first book, and this particular executive said, "Bob, if you really think about it, take a look at your grandparents' generation, maybe even your parents' generation. It was commonplace for everyone to kind of graduate from high school. And if you really wanted to kind of distinguish yourself, there was a select few that went on to college. And they went on because they were going to go and do like some type of professional roles. But most people just graduated high school and then entered into the workforce. Then what happened was all of a sudden it became commonplace for everybody. You graduate high school, everybody's going to college. Now, if everyone's got a college degree, now if you really want to distinguish yourself, you don't just need a college degree, you got to have a master's degree. You've got to go on, and that's how you distinguish yourself even further. And because of this, again, this is executive placement firm, headhunting firm telling me this. They said, now, so the cost of school and everything is skyrocketed, and people are saying, hey, do I really want to invest and get an undergraduate degree? Do I want to go and get an advanced degree? Do I want to saddle myself with $100,000 of student loan debt? And you hear all these stories of people graduating and not being in their career fields and struggling. My goodness, I mean, you pick up the Wall Street Journal almost on a weekly basis. There's an article of somebody in their 50s or 60s who still hasn't paid off their student loan debt. Yeah. And now it's come full circle where people are saying, you know what? I can go out and have a successful career. I can go out and be successful as an entrepreneur, start a business, and I don't need to do that. I'm going to bypass all of that. And so we're seeing a generation now that are saying, and I've had these kind of conversations with people where say, look, I'm going to go to school because I want this particular career and I have to have this credential, as you said, this degree to get in. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to start your own business, it's like you can get all the knowledge you want from Coursera and edX and by reading books from the library and being self-taught. And it's a world-class education.
I do think that the word education is interesting. I mean, I was kind of tracking with what you were saying, and the last word you said is the word that sparked a thought in my mind.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the biggest things that you do get at a university is an education, and I mean that in a broad sense. So I think that a lot of folks have a lot of pathways to get knowledge and information, and there are even curated pathways to that via things like Coursera and just different skill development platforms and things like that. I do think there's also a compelling kind of finding that the exponential career trajectory growth of people with college degrees versus folks who maybe go a boot camp route is pretty different, at least at this point. And a part of me wonders, I mean, I think a lot about creating space and the space to actually experience the things that you're experiencing. And so we had a conversation a couple of years ago in career services at UVA where we were wanting to figure out how to create more what we called life transforming experiences for students. And so in order to do that, we wanted to kind of operationalize what we meant by life transformational or life transforming experiences. And I was sitting and thinking about how many times I've driven somewhere 20-30 minutes away and then suddenly arrived, which meant that like I just was zoned out the entire way. And I realized that like it's not experiences that change us, it's our reflections on those experiences that change us. And so in a very similar way, I think that university settings tend to create space for reflection and exploration and just kind of wading in the water of the things that you're experiencing versus this kind of full out head down sprint that's just focused on skills. And I think that there's an opportunity for the less traditional education paths and things like that to kind of step that side of their offerings up. But I do think that maybe there's something there where there's more of a tie into how you and your work fits into the larger world, more than just the skills that you have, and kind of you becoming this this like individual human like machine of productivity. And that's the kind of thing that I get nervous about when I hear about the future of education conversations and things. I mean, I listened to a very fascinating episode of the Venture Stories podcast by Village Capital, where they had Kaplan's entrepreneur in residence. Can't believe I forget her first name. It's something O'Connor. But she was just talking about the future of education. And they brought up this notion of, white labeled universities as a service to sell to a Facebook or a Google, because the question came up of like, well, what if you just went to a Google university because they know what it takes to be a successful software engineer at Google, and they already teach workshops and skill development classes through growwithgoogle.com. And so why don't they just syndicate that and make it a university? And I was thinking about that, and I'm like, it's just like so utilitarian.
Yeah.
It's so abstracted away from the fact that you're actually contributing to the world that you live in, and the fact that like your work actually builds the version of the world that we live in. And I think that a lot of times we approach our careers with this inevitability of like, I need a job, when in reality we need to do work, and we need to do work because our world needs cultivation, and there's a lot of opportunity in it to be uncovered, and work is how we do that, whether it's through a job or hobbies or whatever the case may be. And often we're able to align the work that we want to do with the work that a company is doing, and so that's great. But I just fear that the more we abstract that down to strictly just check boxes of skills, we're kind of creating this utilitarian, postmodern, like very like Matrix-esque society of robots that like all of the sci-fi movies depict.
Yeah. Well, as you highlight that, it triggers the thought in me that we're in some respects we are moving away from the classical education, where universities were originally started to gather people together, where there was time and space to think and to ponder and to debate, and it wasn't just, well, what's the right answer, but it was it was this talk and discussion, as I highlighted at the very beginning of the program. One of my favorite memories of our time together was when we were at South by Southwest. And it was in the evenings where we sat around in the hotel lobby, and with a group of people, we were discussing and debating and pondering the issues of the day, the technology, the economy. And it was the whole adage of iron sharpening iron. It's like, hey, I've got a different viewpoint on that. This is my worldview. This is my experience. What do you think? Where are we going to go in the future? And there's a word that you used a second ago, and this might take us down a little bit of a rabbit trail, starts to get into maybe some social elements today, but it's something that I've thought about and I'm really concerned about, and I want to get your viewpoint. It was the word space. You've now been at two different universities, and one of the things that I have witnessed over the last number of years was the term safe space at major universities, right? Where my mental model of what universities and colleges were developed for has been kind of shaken, because one of the things that I relished so much about my undergrad at the University of Tennessee, I didn't get this so much in my engineering program at the University of Arkansas, but I got a lot of it at Harvard Business School, was getting into environments where there were people who had vastly different worldviews, opinions, religious preferences. The diversity was so immense, and being in an environment where we could openly debate and talk and discuss and share these ideas, and I feel like it made me a better leader. It helped me understand the world. I saw the world through different lenses and viewpoints and so forth. And then I see universities creating safe places, and it's almost like as if debate and discussing on certain ideas is no longer allowed. It's like no, we're not going to talk about that. It's like almost like this very, very myopic viewpoint. We can only discuss it if you view this. What's your view? I mean, have you seen that with your universities? What's your perspective on it? Is it eroding the kind of the education that we should be trying to aspire students to partake in?
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of question and line of thinking, and it's definitely jogging some thoughts in my mind. The first, I don't know.
I know it's probably loaded. It's a loaded question. I apologize.
Well, it's absolutely loaded, but it's totally fine. These are the types of conversations that we need to have more candidly, because otherwise, if they're just bubbling beneath the surface and folks aren't able to actually talk, to your point, we're just censoring all types of conversation, then that's not going to change anyone's viewpoint or anything, and people are just going to get further entrenched. The question that came to my mind, a quick question, is do you take your shoes off at home?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, especially now with the COVID crisis, we're like, hey, everyone take your shoes off. We don't want to bring the germs in the house, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in my mind, that's how I thought about a safe space. I'm like, imagine living in a world where you never got to take your shoes off. Imagine living in a world where you never have a place where you can just feel like you're at home. It's one thing to have protection on your feet, but it's another thing to just be like, you know what? I'm free. This is my space. I'm at home. My feet are kicked up. If I step on a Lego that a kid left, it is what it is. It happens. It's a part of life. So, I mean, what I think is that there's some efficacy in having safe spaces for that sense of comfort, belonging, camaraderie, especially because they're usually kind of made in the context where, folks who are advocating for a safe space are advocating for it because they don't feel like they have space. At the university or the specific organization or entity or whatever. But it also makes me think of the opposite end of it, that actually speaks to the creation of what you were talking about in terms of having the diversity of ideas and things like that. Universities are also safe spaces for that, in the sense that safety is something that's like peace, where there's this difference between peacemaking and peacekeeping. And I think that not having a safe space is peacekeeping. Having a safe space can be like peacemaking, where you're drawing a line in the sand and saying, we want to create an environment that fosters a safe space for all people. And if some people don't feel safe in this space, then they're not going to be able to be a part of that diverse community that we want. But if we create space for them to feel safe enough to like fully settle into themselves, then we can have these more diverse conversations. When I was saying settle into themselves, I had this visualization of cooking a steak and letting it rest for 10 minutes. And how much that like re-imparts the flavor into the steak, allows the hemoglobin to kind of like recontextualize and things like that. And the texture is just beautiful. And I think that that's what safe spaces allow us to do, is to settle into ourselves enough to be able to say, okay, I'm ready to go back out. I'm ready to be a part of this broader conversation and things like that. So I absolutely see the double-edged sword in them, but would fall on the side of like thinking that there's some efficacy in exploring how to do them. I definitely think that there are plenty of ways that they've not been done well, but I think that ultimately they can act in service of a more diverse conversation.
So let me try to maybe clarify my comment a little bit and see if you can help me shed some insight and perspective. So where I have, and again, I admittedly I am not an expert in this area, but as I have read articles, Wall Street Journal primarily is one of my news sources, but as I've read articles and things that have happened, specifically at two institutions, Yale and Princeton, okay, and where I felt like, and I was like, and I understand the concept of a safe place, maybe somewhere on campus where like-minded students can kind of get and gather and talk, and they feel, hey, this is part of my community, this is part of, these are my people. But it felt like, at least in this article, as if we weren't talking about a spot on the university, but almost as if the entire university was being created into a safe space to where you couldn't have dialogue and debate, vigorous discussion of opposing views in a classroom with a professor. Like it was, you had to have, and that's where I would feel it's like, if I'm paying that kind of money to go to a prestigious university, I want to be able to have vigorous debate with my professor and other students in a healthy environment, because I feel like that helps me see and experience the world different. Let me give you a prime example. It was a life-changing moment for me, something I've never witnessed. And this was a couple years ago, and it was right around the time that the Arab Spring was really underfoot, right? We were talking, we've got riots. Cities are on fire in the Arab world. People being killed in the streets, right? Oppressive governments are coming down on people. And of course, you've got Israel right smack dab in the middle of this. And within my program, we had a number of Jewish leaders, CEOs who were participating in this, in the Harvard Business School executive program, who were there. They're running big companies, and they also had leaders from around the Arab world, various different countries, very prominent CEOs, and they had this closed door meeting where people came together and were talking about the issues, and it was like it was no holds barred, but it was there was love and respect and admiration, and people said in that and I learned so much about the conflict and the issues and so forth. And I watched guys who sat there in this auditorium talking with each other and said, you know what, I cannot say this. I can't go back to my country and say what I'm saying for fear that I could be killed, or my family could be persecuted. I can't have these discussions openly because of certain things that might go on. And I saw people who were able to at the end of this, tears in their eyes, hugging each other, right? And there was commonality, and you see this bonding, and I would think. I think that it would be helpful in our colleges that we have those types of environments where that type of dialogue. And look, there were people who had very different viewpoints on some of these world issues, but at the end, they realized that they had more in common than they had differences, right? And I don't know. So that's what I would hope we would see at universities like Yale and Princeton and others, where those types of debates can happen. I'm concerned. Well, we might be a little bit off topic here, but so my daughter, as a junior at the University of Tennessee, I want her to have those types of dialogues, but it feels like sometimes and it's those dialogues aren't happening. I don't know why.
No, I completely agree. I mean, and I think it's hard for students to have those types of conversations when they're not even modeled by the adults, in the world. And so I think that universities are kind of a microcosm in that sense of our broader society, because I would think that you'd probably say the same thing, and I would say the same thing about our broader dialogue in our country as well. I mean, it's why there's this running narrative around cancel culture, because that's essentially what we're talking about. And so, like, people aren't able to express quote unquote dissenting opinions, which is like wild to even call it that, because that shows that there's like one right way to think, which like is to your point, and that's not the world that we want to live in. We want to live in a world that has diverse ideas that thrive, and we're able to kind of grow. And I think that a little bit of it too gets to this zero-sum type of thinking, where we think that there's a finite amount of resources or power or access that exists, and so we're all fighting for our side to have a slice, when in reality, I just think that there's so much that we haven't seen yet, because we haven't created it yet, because we haven't decided to come together enough to do it yet. And so, yeah, I'm absolutely like all for, more diverse dialogue and things like that. And I absolutely think that we have so much more to see, which is a big part of why I'm at a university, because I have access to, like, I get to read the Harvard Business Review, through our library, so I don't have to subscribe to it. Those are I'm a nerd at heart, and I absolutely love reading scholarly articles, books, all types of stuff. I love interacting with our faculty. I love interacting with students who wanted to choose an academic path, and things like that. And so I love having those conversations, and absolutely see so much more room for that in our world, for sure.
So I want to be a little bit selfish here and ask a question specifically for my daughter, and hopefully it'll be meaningful to other people who are listening on this. So for my daughter, who is a junior in college, how should she look for and engage those types of discussions on a college campus? What's the right way? You're a college administrator. You're seeing this. You've been at two different universities. You got your finger on the pulse. If she's knowing that we've got like this inflamed culture where everything just seems like it's just we're on a trigger, right? Everything's like how does she how do you counsel and people to be able to have these types of discussions on a college campus or with people of maybe have different viewpoints than you the right way? Any suggestions there?
Yeah, I mean, the thought that comes to mind is just authenticity. And what I mean by that in this particular instance is having actual friends who have different backgrounds and things like that, because it's never going to come off right if you want to have a conversation with like a person or a group that you don't necessarily agree with, and the first time that you interact with them is to have a conversation like that. There's no way that that's going to be a positive interaction. And so, like, you have to have been there before in some context, whether as friends or classmates, and actually acknowledge their existence as a human before their existence as someone who embodies an issue. I think that that's the biggest piece of advice that I would give, is to not let that be your first interaction.
Hey, I want to debate you on this topic. I know you have a different viewpoint of me. Let's debate.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I heard you believe this. Okay, this isn't going to go down well.
I was up in Michigan just a weekend or two ago, and just social. I think Facebook has become a complete sewer, and I remember one of my opening remarks was this. I said, guys, in this world that seems to be like it's on fire, right? So I maybe you're better than me. Maybe you're a better communicator than me, and you're just a world-class convincer. But I'm telling you, I have literally never once in my life sent a tweet or a Facebook message or a 30-second video, or and somebody who had a diametrically opposed opinion or worldview than me said, "Oh my gosh, Bob, that tweet or that video has changed my mind. I'm now going to vote the way you vote. You've radically changed the way I view the world." It doesn't happen. All we do is we're living in our echo chambers, and we're riling up emotions on both sides. And the only way to impact the world, to have change, to help, is I think we need to be water on the fire, not gasoline on the fire. And you got to go out there. We got to serve. We got to love. We have to build relationships, like you were just saying. Have a friendship, build a relationship, have community, and through the course of that, then you can have meaningful, authentic, and transparent dialogue to impact change.
Absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite quotes that I've adopted as definitely a principle in life is from Brene Brown, who I affectionately call Mama Brene, because I just get so much insight from her. Yeah. But she said that people are hard to hate from a distance, or people are easy to hate from a distance. Move in. Yeah. And so I've kind of made this mental algorithm where when I have a visceral reaction against something that someone says, or in the way that they're presenting themselves, I instantly say, okay, like, move in. Like, that's just like how I am trying to retrain my brain, because I'm like, there's something about what they're saying that is drawing a visceral reaction out of me. But what I truly believe, though, is that they're a human first, and like that they have intrinsic value, and that's what I want to default to, as opposed to like my disdain for their viewpoint or something like that. And so, like, how might I move in? Like, how might we have a different type of discussion where I can get to know more of them as a person, get to know more of where they're coming from. Yeah. And that's not an algorithm that always runs. Sometimes my RAM runs out, and I'm like, yeah, that algorithm, it didn't work right now. I don't like this person right now. Yeah. But that's what I'm striving.
Yeah. Well, that is a awesome quote. I'm going to make sure to have that written down, and that's going to be one of my default mechanisms as well. Yeah, where our leadership team is going through a study, and it's lead like Jesus. If you think about Jesus as a leader, the best leader, in my opinion, of all time, and that's one of the things that he did. Right, Jesus, he didn't move away. He leaned in. He moved in. Right. So he was having dinner with members of society that were despicable to all the religious leaders. Like, how can you be having dinner with these people? It's like, these are the people I came to talk to. These are the people I came to to understand and to save. Right.
So also they make the best curry chicken in town. So
that's right. That's right. That's right. So that is so true. We need to step in and be a part of those situations. Well, we went down a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but I feel like it was very meaningful and helpful for me, and hopefully for the leaders as well. Let's circle back around to the position that you're in at the University of Virginia. You find yourself at I believe, the cutting edge epicenter of a new economy. I want to tee this up, and then I'm just going to let you run with it, because every single time we talk on these topics, I take copious notes. But it was just a few years ago, that there was not a degreed program for data science, data analytics, and so forth. Yeah. And the Harvard Business Review is running an article about this was going to be the sexiest and most needed career field in the next 20 years. They say that data is the new gold in our economy, or it's the digital oil for the new economy. And you actually went over there, were a part of one of the very first, if not the first, degreed programs within the United States in data science and data analytics. You mentioned a year or so ago that literally Google, Facebook, big companies were cherry picking your students, 1 and 2 years after they hadn't even graduated, and they're getting offers to leave to go work in Silicon Valley. What in the world is going on? Tell us what's happening here. This is just mind blowing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, if you think about how connected we are these days, I mean, I'm sitting, I always joke and tell my mom that I'm probably going to get taken out by AI or a drone because I'm just an early adopter with tech, and I'm sitting around surrounded by smart lights and Bluetooth headphones and wireless everything, and it's all collecting data. It's not just serving a function, it's all collecting data. And even with us reporting this podcast, we're creating data. So not only the actual audio and things like that, but the metadata, the location tags, the fact that the two of us connected, twice over the last couple of weeks, that's a data point, and the cadence of speech that we have, like those are the types of things that they can map on the back end and then start to essentially draw larger conclusions about advertising and society and things like that. And so I think that basically the reason why all of this revolution has happened is because of Moore's law, which basically states that every year the rate of computation kind of doubles. And so basically what that just means is that computers can remember more stuff and process more stuff. So imagine having access to literally everything that you've ever seen and been exposed to in your brain, and having it readily accessible. And then people working to make you be able to fit more in your brain, and then other people working to make that accessible in more quick ways and in more kind of matrixed ways as well. And that's essentially how we've gotten data science, where we have more ways to store data, we have more ways to codify data and information. So data is not just numbers, it's not just ones and zeros, it's not just spreadsheets and things like that. It's also video, it's also audio. Natural language processing is a whole field of data science. Computer vision is a whole field of data science, which maps to facial recognition and things like that. The fact that you can ask new questions, instead of just looking at economic GDP to kind of look at the economic predictors of a recession, you can actually look at satellite images of shipping containers moving out of China and kind of, map that to its usual progression and movement across decades and things like that, and then start to make predictive trends. And so it's just an interesting time, and it's also interesting because we haven't figured out what we believe about privacy, at least not in the United States yet either. And so I know that there's really a big debate right now with Apple. I'm an iPhone user, and I've early adopted into the beta of the new operating system, and it tells you every time something is copied and pasted from an app. It gives you a little push notification, and it's actually kind of creepy. And I know Facebook is pushing back on that now, and they just were in a hearing with Congress on Wednesday of this week trying to figure that stuff out. And they're afraid that Apple is going to break their ad revenue model because they're telling us what Facebook is copying and tracking from us. And so they're afraid that when we see it, they know we'll be afraid. And so it's just kind of interesting that we have all these parallel conversations that are happening where we're experiencing a lot of convenience in the way that we interact with the world because of automation, because of technology, because of machine learning and things like that. But also we are ceding our rights to privacy digitally, and I think that that's loosening our minds to just privacy in general. And yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting time. I mean, obviously, I'm a hopeful, optimistic person, and so I also see a lot of upsides for it as well. We have opportunities to do precision medicine, where instead of just getting a prescription that is a generic prescription for 10 milligrams of whatever, maybe based on your DNA makeup and your biochemistry, you need a specific cocktail of 3 milligrams plus 7 milligrams of something else. We'll be able to make those types of recommendations 10, 20 years from now. And we're also looking at actually defining what health is for the first time, which is exciting because right now our only relationship to health is when we don't have it, or when it's unhealth or not good health, but we don't actually know how to define a healthy person. We can loosely say, you run marathons. I would argue that you're a healthy person, but we don't know that necessarily normed against an entire population. So Google is doing Project Baseline, where they're defining health through their life sciences company called Verily. So things like that are happening where we're asking completely new questions, which is fascinating. People are able to look at brain scans and scans of tumors and things like that through computers now. And imagine if a doctor was looking at 30 of them in a day, they're definitely going to degrade in their ability to be able to assess those things because their eyes are going to get tired. A computer's eyes are never going to get tired, and they can read more than 30.
Right.
And
they're more accurate. They're more accurate than doctors.
Yeah, because they're not getting tired. There's not that fatigue. They can pick up on more nuance. They can see more color bands and things like that. And it's fascinating. And so it also means that we're creating a world where you do have to be more aware of how to integrate and leverage technology in your work. Otherwise, it's just going to be outsourced to technology. Because why wouldn't it? Unless someone was just benevolent and wanted to spend more money on paying a human to do it. But why would they want to do that? And so that's one of those things that I struggle with as well, because as a career services professional and a professional counselor by training, I mean, I love to see people pursue things that they're passionate about and in. And I don't love when people kind of resign themselves to making decisions based on pure practicality when if that's not how they usually make decisions. Like, it's one thing if you're just like a super practical person, but if you know that you're passionate about pursuing a career in something, but you know that there's more money in a different career field, and you feel like there's not even a chance for you to pursue the thing you're passionate about because the way that we're going is just so pragmatic and so technical that like you just have to give up the life that you want to live, that's like kind of depressing to me a little bit. And so it's also a part of why I'm like so passionate about talking about these sorts of things with people who are not technologists, because I just want to get them more aware of what we are capable of, where we're headed right now, technologically and economically and in terms of jobs and things like that. And then reminding them that nothing is inevitable. Like, we don't have to go that way. We have an opportunity to create the version of the future we want, but the only way we can do that is if people are engaged in the conversation. And the only way they can be engaged in the conversation is to know it's even happening. Right. And so that's why I just get on soapboxes all the time, basically.
Well, it's a brilliant insight, Reggie, because you're so spot on there. Having people understand what's going on and then be involved in the conversation, speaking about it, which goes back to my earlier point of let's have open dialogue, let's have discussion. What should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? There's you very artfully highlighted all the positives. There's so many positives of this rapid advancement that we're having right now, and there really are. There's and you can see technologists that kind of get on either side of the line. Some have this dystopian fear of the future of like the robots are just going to kill us all, and this is awful. And then you have all these others that have a more of a utopian view of like, this is unbelievable. The lifespan's going to increase. Look at all the things we're going to be able to do, and so there's very diametrically opposed opinions on this, but there are pros and cons with this advancement. We're living at a time where we are advancing faster than any other point in human history. And I think that discombobulation is causing uncomfort, which I believe is also causing a lot of is exacerbating the civil unrest. People feel uncomfortable. The world is moving so much more rapidly. They don't have enough time to change. And so people are just like, what's going on? Where's my place in the world? Right? And so it's causing...
Well, our systems haven't changed either. Like, I mean, we see how rapidly the world is changing, but nothing about the way that we've engaged with it up to this point has changed along with the rest of the world. So basically, like even thinking about universities and things like that. I mean, the fact that like new coding languages are literally created, like I remember when Apple made Swift, the coding language, and that was the new language to make apps for the App Store. And the first thing that I thought was like, how much would it suck to have just graduated with a degree in computer science, learned JavaScript and Ruby on Rails and all of these other things, and then Apple said, no, we're not using that. We made up a thing. And now you have to learn something that like they don't even teach or didn't teach at that time in universities in order to get a job. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like
4 years, $100,000 of student loan debt, and you're like, I got to start over.
Yes. And then learn this thing that's free? Like, are you serious? And I think that to your point, I think that that's where a lot of the unrest is coming from too, where I think we've been kind of taught how to play the game of life, so to speak, and the rules keep changing. Like now, I mean, the just everything is just completely different about all the things that we've been taught, and we're not being told the new rules either. And like people are just basically, I think it's, you know, why we're having our first $1 trillion companies and things like that in the history of, you know, our country and our world and things like that, because there are abilities to exploit kind of cracks in the system, or not necessarily cracks in the system, but more so to leverage like your expertise over people in a disproportionate way, because so many things have changed and so few people have been invited into that change. And so I think that basically technologists are just building a future that they want to live in, and keep kind of shifting the boundary marker of what it takes to participate in building that future with them. And the only way that you can be a part of that future is to help them build that version of the future, as opposed to like new systems being created. So new academic systems in terms of like even education from like early childhood through high school and things like that, because right now all of that stuff is geared to set you up to go to college. Really, it's not really vocational training, not really professional development or kind of life skills that you need to succeed in the workforce. And then when you get to college, a lot of that stuff is not teaching you the cutting edge stuff to get into some of the more nuanced areas where growth is happening in career fields. And it just feels like every system that we go through is like still just not enough. And it's like you sprinted super hard to catch the bus, and then all of a sudden the bus changed its time schedule, and you're like, I just exhausted all of my energy to get here, and that was the only way that I could get to the next point, and you just left and like didn't tell me what I'm supposed to do now. I think that that's how people feel.
Well, and you highlighted a second ago, you said, well, maybe there's cracks in the system. You said, well, maybe, and I think you hit the nail on the head. There are cracks in the system. And I would say, as you were mentioning, we've got some of our very first $1 trillion companies, and we're highlighting Moore's Law and how rapidly the world's changing. I think technology and the advancements of portions of our economic system are changing so rapidly that government and laws and regulation and protections, social systems, our education system has not been able to change rapidly enough to stay abreast of what's happening. It would allowed Facebook to grow. There should be 100 different laws in place right now protecting against things that are going on at Facebook. I think Facebook potentially is one of the biggest threats to modern society, and that's not being addressed. I had somebody was on Facebook just yesterday, someone that I admire and respect, and say, hey, what are the biggest fears that we should be concerned about over the next 10 years? And at the top of my mind, I was like, Facebook. I mean, it's being you're right. I mean, they're fostering civil unrest. They're in this. It's being manipulated to create within the elections and things like that. But it goes to your point. These cracks in the system, they're allowing this to take place. We're not addressing it quick enough. So I think you're spot on. I want to circle back around on another point that you highlighted earlier. With the advancement of all of this technology, I've heard individuals say, and this would be professors at universities have said, you know what, the old system was that you would come to a university and it was the memorization, right? And one of the differences between an American university right now and in some of the things that are going on in China is they said, China is still kind of in that old school of like, you're going to come in and we're just going to like drill this in, you're going to memorize all this stuff. He said any university that is just focused on rote memorization, you're wasting your time. You don't need you carry around in your hip pocket all the information of the globe at your fingertips, and what universities seem to be focused on right now are teaching you the skills of how to learn, teaching creativity, teaching human relations and having emotional intelligence and EQ. These types of things that can't be automated, that are going to be very valuable in the new economy. Can you speak to what you see in that respect? Because there are spots in this new economy that are extremely valuable that will not be able to be automated, where it's relationship focused, having a great emotional intelligence, being able to learn and think. Where should people be focused right now if they're like, I want to strengthen my tool belt, or have the proper tools in my tool belt for me to be successful in this new economy that's growing around me?
Yeah. I mean, my mind was going to you said the word strengthen, and I would say that's the word. Like strengthen and practicing are the two like things that kind of come to mind. So I think that like the way to be great at something is to practice something, and I think that a lot of times we think about practicing skills that are maybe hard skills, quote unquote. But we don't often think about practicing things like resilience or kind of the idea of having enough. We don't practice being uncomfortable and learning how to operate in discomfort. We don't seek out those types of experiences, nor do we actually fully exist presently in them while we experience them. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we've learned anything during this pandemic, and the unrest on top of it, and like so many world leaders dying in the midst of it, either through COVID or through other things, and murder hornets, and you name it. Like, yeah. I mean, everything is like just compounding on itself.
Yeah, China seeds and it's showing up in the mail this week. It's like every day I turn around, there's like some new apocalypse on. I'm just like, oh my gosh, we've got, Jack and the Beanstalk magic beans showing up all over America, murder hornets,
It's insane. It's unreal. But what it shows is that we can't plan for the future. Like as much as we try, our best laid plans are just kind of laid to waste, honestly, when something like this happens. And so resilience is never going to be a bad thing to practice. Learning how to learn is never going to be a bad thing to pay attention to. You mentioned mental models a little bit earlier in passing. That's one of my favorite concepts, and I've been reading Shane Parrish's The Great Mental Models book, and I love it. He talks about Bayesian statistics. He talks about like just different types of models for learning and integrating information. And I think that like paying attention to how you learn and coming up with decision-making frameworks, or at least learning how to make decisions, is going to be a huge skill going forward, because we're going to have to keep reskilling. So how the heck are you going to do that? How are you going to choose what skills you want to learn? How are you going to choose what you want to focus on? Those are going to be questions that you're going to keep having to answer. Mm-hmm. And if you keep approaching it like it's a new question, even though you're going to keep having to answer it, you're only doing yourself a disservice. So that's what I mean by practicing some of those types of things. Mm-hmm. I think that those are the kind of unsexy recommendations that I would give, is more so like practice those fundamentals of like learning how to make decisions, learning how to learn, paying attention to what you value, and fully investing yourself in whatever opportunity you're in now. And what I mean by that is becoming as consummate of a professional in it as you can. So likely there's a professional association for your field. Likely there are thought leaders in your field. Likely there are people who have written books and things like that. Like learn about what you're doing. Like most people just do their jobs, mm-hmm. but they never think about their jobs. And I think that's what separates professionals from people who just do stuff, is that professionals like kind of have a position, they have an opinion on why they're doing the things that they're doing. They are able to make decisions and produce ideas or present ideas because they also know the context with which they're working in. And so I would say, invest in becoming a professional in your field, and things like that, in addition to the things that I mentioned before, like, learning how you learn and kind of creating decision-making frameworks and things. That's what I would say.
That's great insight. What would be some practical tips that you would give somebody who is, say, mid-career and is wanting to reskill? At the top of the program you were talking about, there's these new discussions. Universities are talking about new degree programs for mid-career professionals. We're going to be living longer. Our careers are going to be much longer than what they used to be. It's comical when I hear people talking about the retirement age of 65, and I realize that generations life expectancy is now going to be well over 100 here for my kids' generation, right? And people are going to be working. You've got politicians who are working into their 70s and 80s. Everything's changing. What are practical tips, to get back to the question, what are the practical tips you would give a mid-career professional to reskill or to upskill and to stay plugged in?
Yeah, I think part of that is a little bit of what I was alluding to about professional associations with where they are now. So I think that's a good place to start, is like basically finding out what the associations or what are the people in your field talking about now? What are the emerging trends? And then how might you adapt some of those things into your work? Does that mean you go to a conference and you do an in-service training or something like that, for continuing education units? Or does that mean you find a MOOC or a massive open online course, or like some kind of Skillshare course or something like that to learn a skill on? Also, a thought that I've been having is to maybe think through what some adjacent career paths are to what you're doing now. So, for instance, for me, an adjacent career path might be a student, an academic advising kind of role. It might be working as a recruiter in a corporate setting. It also might be doing business development and sales, like in an organization. It also might just be being a founder, because I was the first person to start this career services shop in our school, and things like that. And so thinking about things like that and that are kind of adjacent to your field or proximate to your field, and then thinking through some of the ones that might be interesting. And you thinking that it might be interesting is not you committing to changing your career. It's just you thinking it might be interesting. Right. So don't be afraid to commit to thinking that something's interesting. That doesn't mean that you're abandoning what you've been doing. And then when you have some things that you're interested in, explore them some. Just click around some job titles that relate to those things. Then click around some LinkedIn profiles and see what people's career paths are. Perhaps you set up an informational interview and just chat with someone about what they're up to and things like that. I think those are a couple of tactical ways to start exploring what you're interested in. And then there are always a bevy of resources to actually learn the skills that you need. Frankly, I'm trying to figure out, and maybe you'll have some suggestions for me, I'm trying to figure out how to just bone up on some business skills. I mean, frankly, I have what's the book called? I forget what it's called. It's a very thick book that's essentially an MBA in a book, which obviously is not an MBA in a book, but that's how it brands itself. And so it just teaches you basics of finance and things like that, and all the different aspects of business. But I really want to learn just some fundamentals about how to become better at understanding the work that I do in a holistic context, so that if I were to build out a scaled version of career services, how might I do that well, and also in a way that's transferable outside of higher ed and outside of career services. I think that's why I want to learn about business, because, and maybe that's another practical tip too, is always be thinking 3 steps ahead. So don't just think about what you can do in your job now. Think about what you can do in your job now that's not going to lock you into only being able to do that job. What are the skills that you can learn that'll help you in your job, but that can also help you in something else. Right. And so I've also been obsessed with learning about products, and so essentially product management, product design, and trying to think through some of my ideas for career services and delivering them like they were a product, and setting up a Trello Kanban board and things like that, just to kind of practice some product and project management and things like that. So I think that those are a couple of ways that you can kind of leverage where you're at, to hopefully open up some more doors as well.
Well, I think that's brilliant of what you're doing. I'll share with you some advice that I have been giving people that I'm mentoring, and especially young college students who are kind of coming up through the ranks. I've given this to my own kids, and I practice it myself. So I think it's extremely important to know where you are strong, where your strengths are, but also where you need to get stronger, right? Where are the weak points? And there'll be times I'll take stock and be like, you know what? I know I've got a great education, a whole host of different areas, but I've never really read on this particular topic, or I feel like I'm a little bit weak here. I don't have the mastery of this particular subject that I would like. And it could be, in finance, or it could be in accounting. And if I know that, and I know that that's going to be extremely important for my role, one of the things that I've found very beneficial is going out to Coursera, and I have been amazed at the education programs on Coursera that you can get, and from world-class universities, the University of Michigan, the University of Virginia, Dartmouth, you name it, and you can be taking an accounting course, a finance course, an investment course, all sorts of programming courses, and at the end of it, have a certification. It costs you, sometimes if you don't want the actual certification you can put on your resume, it's free. But if you want to actually have the test to go along the way and get the certification, sometimes it's $30 or $40. I've taken a handful of those courses. I'll tell young college kids, because look, you know this as a college administrator. There's a lot of free time when you're in college, right? They're not working 80-hour weeks. I said, look, you want to get ahead of your competitors? I'll tell you what you do. You're gonna walk into a job interview. You're going to be sitting down next to somebody, and you're going to say, hey, congratulations, you've got your 4-year degree from XYZ University. And then you're going to sit there and say, hey, not only do I have my college degree, but I went out and I talked to somebody who was 10 years, 15 years down the path in my career field. I asked them, what is it that you are currently doing in your career field that they didn't teach you in college? What are the skills, the things that you wish you would have learned in college that you did not get in college, that you are using every single day, that is absolutely critical for the success in your career? I said, what I want you to do is in your free time, while you're going to college, you go out to Coursera and you get get those certifications. Because now you're sitting down with the interviewer and saying, I know exactly what I need to be successful in this. Not only do I have my certification, my undergraduate degree, but I went out and I talked to a leader. This is what they told me, and boom, I've got all these. And be like, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. You're hired, right?
I like that, and I have a follow-up question for you. Then maybe because this is a unique opportunity where we're having a conversation about the future of higher education and college, and you're a parent of a college student, and you're also an advocate for learning things outside of the classroom. I'm curious if you are in the minority or if you're the majority of your friends with kids in college who are okay with paying how much college costs and suggesting that your kid do something on top of it. Or is that something that you think is something that the college should be doing?
You're talking about paying for courses above and beyond.
Yeah, and more so, even if they were free, like the fact that as much as college costs, it's not enough.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that, because we also run into that with students, where students are just exhausted and exasperated and are just like, I worked my butt off to get into this university, and I'm working my butt off in this university, and you're telling me that I have to work my butt off to do something else to actually get a job, so that I can retire and no longer work my butt off.
Right. Yeah.
And so I also wonder, and I know that parents struggle with that as well, where it's like, what are you going to do for my student, who we're paying a lot of this money for? So I'm curious to hear, because I'm definitely on the same train as you with the skill development and things like that. But I'm also curious as to if you think that's okay, or if you think that that's a direction that, universities should move in.
Right. Well, I guess I have a multitude of opinions on this. And so since we talked about earlier that colleges and universities are not adapting quick enough, it takes forever for them to bring a new course or a new degree program. They got to go through all this, certification to get it done, and the world's changing rapidly. So I'm trying to teach my kids and people that I mentor and coach, be like, you've got to be at the cutting edge. You got to do whatever you've got to do to be successful. And so I intuitively know colleges are already going to be somewhat out of date, a little bit, right? They're not going to be. And when a professor at Harvard says that your college education has a shelf life of 3 years because the world's changing so rapidly, that should be a wake-up call for everybody. And his point was, you need to be a lifelong learner, be curious, be constantly learning. So I'm trying to drill that into my kids and folks that I'm mentoring. So do I wish that all colleges would just, my daughter or people be able to go there and get what they need? And yes, I wish, but I know that that's not the world that I live in. So I realize that I've got to, adapt and overcome. And here's why I don't get upset. I don't get upset by the fact that my daughter is going to have to go above and beyond. I remember a mentor of mine very, very early in my career said, Bob, you know what? To be successful in life, it's really easy because a vast majority of people are willing to do the bare minimum to get by. They're willing to be average. They're not willing to go above and beyond. And so if you're willing to go above and beyond and work hard, now you're competing with just a very small amount of people who are willing to do the extra. That's why it's so easy to be, a success and be successful in life. And so I look at it, be like, if all colleges were doing it, then everybody's going to be graduating equal footing. And honestly, I'm just being truthful. I'm always looking for, how can I have an edge? How can I have a competitive advantage? When I was an athlete, I wanted a competitive advantage. I wanted to make sure I was wearing the right shoes. I was have the right diet. I look at it as when I'm doing this gives me a competitive advantage. I want my daughter to walk into that interview and have a competitive advantage over, there's going to be thousands of people interviewing for that job. How does she set herself above and apart from everybody else? If everybody else is willing to walk in there and say, hey, this is what I did in college, I say, Tris, you've got to figure out how you're extra. You've got to figure out how you've done extra. You've done extra work. You've got these extra certifications. You've done the internship. And people are working their tail off, but if you want to be successful in life, you've got to figure out how you are going to go above and beyond. And the vast majority of people are not willing to put the time. That my opinion. A vast majority of people are just like, I just want to do the required reading, the required coursework. I want to do the basics. I just want to, I want to check the box. I want to get my degree and move on. Be like, okay, that's great. But for the people who want to be successful, looking for those extra things, I think it sets them apart. So I don't know that.
No, that makes sense, and that's great. And I'm also curious to know do you experience other parents thinking the same way or thinking along the same lines? Just kind of anecdotally from the folks that you know.
I don't. I have a conversation. They're like, "Oh, I'm writing a check. I'm sending my kid to school," and I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, what else are they doing? It's very rare that I'm hearing, people talking about the extra. Right. And I can take a look at it in my business. Right. I have conversations with people all day long. People tell me about their goals, their dreams, their hopes, all this type of stuff. And I can tell the people who are actually doing it and those who aren't. There's a big difference between talk and action. Right. There's a whole bunch of people who say, this is what I'm going to do. And then I'm looking for who are the people who are doing the extra. And you know what? It's the people who are doing the extra that are always at the top of the charts, making rank advancements, moving on. Right. And you distinguish yourself very quickly by whether you're willing to be a little extra.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, one of the things that for me, who wants to help people in my company be extra, go the extra mile. One of the things that we created, the brand is the New Way MBA. It's an education training system specifically for our leadership team, and we have audios and teachings that come out each and every week. So, and they're able to plug in with mentors. But the thing I love about it is they have the ability to be able to practice on a daily and weekly basis the concepts and the things that we're teaching. Also be able to plug back in, do an analysis. Hey, how's it working? How are you doing? Where are you strong? Where can you get stronger? Plug in with that mentor. A lot of reading. We have a book of the month program and books that will kind of come down and say, hey, you need to understand this. These are the concepts. A lot of stuff being focused on relationship development, emotional intelligence. We want to bring in thought leaders like yourself. Other people that can speak and help them keep their finger on the pulse. What other things do you think that we should be incorporating into this new way MBA? Any ideas?
Well, I would be remiss to say data analysis, of course. Mm-hmm. I mean, or data literacy at least, and the ability to be able to read charts and kind of form questions in a way that are actually analyzable, where you can actually collect data on them and make decisions based on that. So that would be one thing. Let's see. Yeah, you kind of put me on the spot.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Admittedly, this is
I'm usually game to be put on the spot.
Yeah, admittedly, it's an education system tailored for a sales force, very, very relational. And it's one of the things that I love about this aspect, that no matter what industry that you're in, I believe you see that they've been able to automate a whole bunch of things, but you have not been able to automate human-to-human contact and interaction and engagement. Sales training is still the backbone of any growing business within the United States. It's needed everywhere you go. So if you become world-class at sales and relationships and emotional intelligence and learn those types of things, it will travel with you no matter where you're at in life, no matter what career field that you're in. So I think it's one of those incredible skill sets to have. So we're just trying to help our people to be super strong in those particular areas. And yeah, so if you've got any recommendations or things that you see in the future, please let me know.
I will. And a book that comes to mind is two books come to mind. They're a little bit loosely related, but I don't know if you've read what's it called? The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, his newer book. And it's incredible. He essentially juxtaposes finite games and infinite games. And he essentially kind of looks at, it's a concept I forget who created, but a finite game is something like basketball, where you know what the rules are, you know whose team is on, you know who is on whose team, you know how to score a point, and you know how to end the game. And so there are rules for that. Infinite games don't have those sorts of things. Infinite games are things like life, or even a business, for instance. Like your infinite games, your goal is to perpetuate the game, not necessarily to win in the game, so to speak. And so I think that it's a really interesting framing around how to think through problems, because it reminds me, when I was reading through it, it was reminding me of how I was interacting with my work when I first encountered design thinking, and how it helped me reframe problems and questions and ask questions that necessarily gave me completely different answers than the more closed questions that I was asking before. And in a similar way, it's helped me to reframe a lot of encounters or problems that I'll face at work, or challenges that I'll face at work, as something that's more of an infinite game rather than a finite game. I don't think that I'm doing a great job of kind of describing how it would map onto a business process, but I think it's a book worth looking into.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other one is called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. And she, my mind was blown when I found out that her partner was Anand Giridhar Das, who wrote Winners Take All, which is a fascinating book about billionaires and things like that. But The Art of Gathering, one of the things that I took from it is it's really about not just event planning, but just getting people together. And so I think there's a lot of relational aspect in that. But one of the things that I love that she talks about is that, like, anything that you plan should have a disputable purpose. And so if you just get people together to say, oh, we're just hanging out, like, that's not really a compelling reason for a lot of people to show up. But if you kind of take a position on something, like this is going to be the best event that you've ever come to, like it's kind of crazy, but like you took a position, and so there are a lot of little insights like that that kind of help. And so one of the examples that she gave was Dinner and Block. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of this worldwide movement where you have to get invited to come to a dinner. You get the invitation the night before of where the dinner is going to be. You bring your own table. Like you have to dress in white. There's a dress code. And basically, there are all of these rules centered around like how you have to interact in order to participate in this dinner. And she kind of gave that as an example of why it always sells out immediately and why it has such a cult following, because people like things that are well-defined enough to be able to understand and wrap their minds around, versus things that are a little bit more open-ended and things like that. So I just think that there are a lot of principles that, again, I'm not quite landing the plane with how those things connect with sales or business, but if we had a little bit more time to kind of banter back and forth a little bit, I think I could tease it out. But I think that like you would probably see a lot of connections in these books to some of the things that you all are talking about. And so those are the two books that come to mind.
Well, I love book recommendations, and those are two that they weren't even remotely on my radar, never even heard of them. So that's awesome. I can't wait to go out and get them. I'm definitely going to read them. Well, speaking, you're talking about the art of gathering and people coming together in this time where so many people feel isolated. I'm hearing that that there's depression is increasing, anxiety is increasing. People are struggling through this pandemic. People who have been isolated and locked at home. Our company is a big part of it is community, bringing people together, having community. And we've had events that were scheduled that we weren't able to hold, and we're trying to hold online gatherings via Zoom and build community. What are you doing at a university level, and do you have any insights or any ideas to help keep people connected and to keep building community? I mean, we've got entrepreneurs that have their own communities, right? They're trying to bring these people together in their local community. Any insights there?
Yeah, I mean we're doing a lot of similar things. So we've had book club discussions with our students that are led by faculty, and these are not classes. These are just kind of external things where students are able to engage in topics that are very relevant, but not necessarily a part of the curriculum, things like that. So we've had things like that. We've had Zoom happy hours. We've had Zoom scavenger hunts, and so there are organizations that actually host virtual events that you can pay to come in and do things, just like team building activities and things like that. And so we've leveraged some of that, and so I'd encourage you to look into some of that kind of stuff too. It's pretty cool. And then we've done like Zoom bingo, where it's like if someone says neural network in your breakout group, then like put an X down there or something like that. Just kind of data sciencey types of things. So we've done that sort of thing. I'm actually wanting to have a DJ, like kind of during one of the breaks in one of our events, so that folks don't log off of Zoom. I want like a 15-minute break, but instead of that being a reason for someone to just try to sneak out digitally, like I want to have a DJ just kind of DJing in between the break and say like, go make your coffee to some music in the background. So thinking through things like that. I might even have a Zoom brunch. I talked to this same DJ about potentially having him DJ a virtual brunch so that people are going to have music to kind of talk or cook through and everything. Those are some of the ways that I've been experiencing it. And then, of course, some social distance hangouts with folks that I'm closer to, where we just kind of sit a little bit distanced apart. Sometimes we wear masks if we're a little bit closer, and things like that. So, yeah. Those are some ways that we've been connecting at the school, and then those are some ways that I've been personally connecting as well.
I love your idea of a DJ. I've got a good friend of mine up in Vancouver who's an up-and-coming DJ. I'll put you in touch with him. So if you're looking for somebody who's talented, who's rising through the charts, and he's a CEO by trade, but he's like taken on this new career, mid-career. He's like, and he's always had this kind of like secret passion on the side, and all of a sudden he's gone public with it. And I mean, I didn't know that there was like these charts for DJs, but apparently apparently there are, and he's rising through the charts. And I've watched some of his shows via Zoom. I'm like, and I start piping the music through the house. I'm like, this is awesome. I love it. So I love it. I'll put you in touch with him. Well, Reggie,
I can say we have an international DJ.
There you go. Straight from Vancouver, Canada, right? Yes. Yeah, he's great stuff. So you've already given us some really good books. One of the things that I've always enjoyed is when I chat with you is you are a voracious reader. What other things would you recommend for any of our listeners? You know, I know whether it's a podcast, whether it's a blog, anything that you find to be insightful and helpful during these times.
Yeah, I really enjoy the A16Z podcast by Andreessen Horowitz. I love that podcast. It's fascinating. I love the Disrupt Yourself podcast by Whitney Johnson. Another incredible podcast. She just has the most fascinating interviews. Also, Entrepreneurial Thought Leaders, which is a Stanford podcast. That's another one that I love. I'm just kind of scrolling through my podcast now. Of course, I have to shout out the HBR IdeaCast.
There you go. Thank you for putting that in there. If you're going to mention Stanford, you better put in Harvard, right?
Yeah, true. I know. Unfortunately, I don't have one to shout out. And then I also really like Masters of Scale with Reid Hoffman. So, I mean, obviously these are pretty, one track. I love business and tech podcasts. And and I also would add the Smart People podcast as well, by John and Chris. I don't know what their last names are. Chris Stemp. That's his name. That's Chris's last name. Those are some of my favorite podcasts. Yeah, and I'm trying to think about blogs. Newsletters, actually. I really like Exponential View by Azim Azhar. He was a partner over at Andreessen Horowitz for a while, and he just curates some really fascinating content where he has these different sections about AI and about environmental issues and all types of things. And he just does a really good job at curating content around what's next. So that's another medium, too. And if folks like reading articles and things like that, newsletters are super cool ways to find curated content, and Substack is like such a great platform to find newsletters through. So I would recommend checking out Substack and finding some newsletters on Substack as well.
Great. Yeah, I will definitely do that. Reggie, we're sitting here. I'm looking at the time. We've been going for about an hour and 26 minutes, and it feels like it's been 5 minutes. I've had so much fun talking with you, and I've probably got 3 hours more worth of questions and insights I'd like to glean from you. And I always love being in the presence of an intellectual and someone who is at the forefront of their industry and their career field, because the conversation could just go on forever, but I want to be respectful of your time. I just want to say thank you. We went down a number of different rabbit trails. We talked about some social issues on college campuses. We talked about education and of course all the data science. Maybe any final words of wisdom for our listeners? And I would hope that we'd love to have you come back and talk about more issues of the day. I think that there's a lot of information that you could share with our group, but any more maybe words of wisdom for you as before we part?
I guess there's always potential to be cultivated, but now we're actually questioning systems. We are building new systems. We have a lot more on-ramps to participating in building things. So all of the non-traditional types of education that we talked about, skill development, et cetera. So, you don't necessarily have to have a lot of capital or even social capital to be able to pay for or even get recommendation letters to get into a university. I mean, there's just so many things that are changing at the same time that create so much opportunity for people to be part of writing our future. And so, there's so much more to see. And so I just hope that people stop and pay attention to that. And I would encourage people to do that. Like, pay attention to what's changing around you. And feel free to be freaked out by it, because it can be scary. But then remember that, none of it is inevitable, and that there's so much more to see, and that you can play a part in building a future. And so I'd love for folks to I'd love to encourage folks to just stop and realize like the opportunity that a lot of this change is, kind of unveiling and things like that. So that's what I would say. I would say that there's so much more to see, and that nothing is inevitable.
Yeah. It reminds me of a conference I was at, I think about a year ago in Park City, Utah, and there was a vigorous debate with a number of technologists on whether technology was good or bad, whether it was inherently good or whether it was evil. And there was vigorous, debate and discussion on this. And, one Silicon Valley leader, stood up and said, it's like, technology is neither good nor bad. It all depends on whose hands it's in and how it's used. And, we need people who are stepping into the forefront that understand it, and understand the values of society and help craft regulation to ensure that it is used the right way. So I would say I'm hoping that people are inspired today by hearing words that you've shared, your viewpoints and your insights, and want to help craft that dialogue and be a part of that, debate. Not a 125 character tweet or a 2-minute Facebook video. We're talking more nuanced, more substantive debate on that particular issue. And I guess it would be maybe irresponsible of me to not also ask you this final question. With all of the social unrest and things that are going on in our society, and it feels like there's people on both sides that have that are inciting negative viewpoints. How, for people who want to be a part of a substantive and nuanced discussion, to be a good citizen and to win friends, to use the adage, win friends and influence people to make change. Any advice or insight that you would give to that, into a unifying voice in the midst of all this chaos, of how we can come together as a people to make an impact in our communities?
Yeah, I think that where my mind goes there is, if that's our goal, to actually make substantive change, that's good for all of us, then the conversations that we have need to cost us something. They can't be cheap. I think tweets are cheap. Facebook statuses are cheap. Having awkward conversations with your neighbor is costly. It's uncomfortable. Like, it might change the way that they view you. It costs something. And that's the only way that we can move the needle, is to actually invest in the conversations that we have. And so I would say, have more expensive conversations. That's what I would say.
I love it. Authentic and transparent. And I will remember that Brene Brown quote about leaning in, right? Leaning in. I'm going to do that. Hey, Reggie, I want to tell you, you've been not only just a great friend, but you're a great brother. And I absolutely love you. I love spending time with you. I appreciate you investing this amount of time with us and our listeners today. And rest assured, I am going to be calling you back up to find out when we can have part 2, because there's so much more to discuss. And hopefully we'll be able to get together for another great dinner at Ruth's Chris. Once again, we'll have to go back there. And of course, more dialogue and vigorous debate on the future of our economy and our country and all the various things that are going on. And so I really look forward to that. But I just want to say thank you, Reggie.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me here, Bob. I would echo all of the same sentiments, and don't want to take up space in your podcast to do so, but I feel the same way. So awesome. Thank you.
All right. Love you, buddy. We'll talk soon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is another episode of Taking the Leap podcast. I'm your host, Bob Dickey. Hope you enjoyed this segment. God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Taking the Leap podcast with your host, Bob Dickey. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at www.takingtheleappodcast.com and bonvera.rocks. You can also find the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever fine podcasts are distributed. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Taking the Leap.